Afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, July 28th. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and over the next 30 minutes, we're going to be taking a look at 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the past few days. This will be our last midweek roundup for July. We'll be taking a week off next Wednesday. We'll be on vacation with family, but we'll be returning in the second week of August for resumption and for our 150th midweek roundup. So we're looking forward to that edition in early August. So thank you for all joining me today. We're going to be answering 3 questions, as I mentioned, that we've been hearing this past week. First up, how can the U.S. continue to attract the best talent from around the world? Second, why does the Education USA Forum matter? And we found out about that in detail this week. And finally, how should colleges deal with reopening, with changing guidance almost daily coming out as to what's to be expected this fall? So we'll take a look at those 3 questions in the course of the next 30 minutes. For those that are new to the Roundup, thank you for joining us. This is our way through our podcast, through all the major podcast providers, to hear our thoughts on how these questions of the day will impact what we do in international education. Those that are watching live on Facebook, obviously, thanks for taking the time out. Also, those who watch on repeat, either on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel for SMIE Consulting. Thanks for being a part of our community. For those that are new to the Roundup, again, we take the stories that we deal in depth with here on the Roundup from our newsletter that comes out on Mondays at 9 a.m. Eastern. And if you want to subscribe to that, you go to smieconsulting.org/subscribe. See an archive of the past editions, as well as a subscribe button to get on our mailing list for that. I'm putting the link to all the stories we cover, including the most recent newsletter, in the comments section on our Facebook page if you'd like to go more in depth into any of the pieces that we're covering today. So let's get right to that first one. How can the U.S. continue to attract the best talent? And obviously, this is a question that those who have been in international education for more than a minute certainly realize that one of, if not themselves have been influenced by international education, have had the opportunity to interact with students in their college days from around the world, seeing the talent that comes to the United States, either for study or for employment or a combination of both. I'm a product of I'm an immigrant to the United States. When I was 5 years old, our family moved from the UK to the US. My father was on an L1 visa, an intra-company transfer, and I was an L2 in kindergarten and first grade, an intra-company transfer dependent. So we are products of the American dream, the immigrant dream that brought my family to the United States initially for employment for my dad, but certainly has led to our staying here, becoming permanent residents, and eventually citizens of the United States and contributing members of society here. But this has been a dream. Immigrants, we're a nation of immigrants here in the United States since our earliest days, and that's been regularly a part of our nation's history in terms of people coming to the United States for a better opportunity. For their families, for themselves, and certainly that message resonates in higher education in particular when we admit students from around the globe who turn into these amazing talents for not only the United States if they decide to stay, but also for their home countries when they decide to return and contribute back to their home countries in various ways, economically, politically, socially. And that's something that we can be very proud of in the United States, and in particular higher education, and the role that we play in facilitating those dreams and realizing those dreams for those overseas individuals who choose to come and study at our campuses. But maintaining that, we can all admit that the last 4 years have been a pretty rocky road with the previous administration's policies and, in general, anti-immigrant rhetoric. On the whole, that tarnished the United States image abroad in terms of our openness, our friendliness to those that are wished to come to the United States. And even though the targets of much of the administration's attacks were those that were coming for nefarious means or were coming to commit crimes and not bring the best elements into our country. Certainly the impact was much broader than just those intended audiences, for at least on face value. But interesting article coming out of issues in science and technology about attracting and keeping the best and brightest. That article talks about the role of the American scientific enterprise and how we've been losing competitive advantage in the global market. But immigrants that have come to the United States have helped to bolster the United States in science and technology in particular, at a time when the interest from domestic students to pursue STEM fields in particular has not been very high, and certainly not high enough to sustain itself without having international students coming in those fields to keep the engine moving of scientific and innovation and entrepreneurship and investment, human capital and otherwise in infrastructure, science and research infrastructure here in the United States. Clearly, the immigrant legacy has impacted all parts of U.S. society in positive ways, and particularly in science and technology, you hear this over and over again. And this is something that the article quotes that I think is very relevant for international educators to know. Today, and the quote is, "Today, while immigrants make up 18% of the U.S. workforce, they have won 39% of the country's Nobel Prizes in science, comprise over 40% of STEM PhD graduates, and 28% of the science and engineering faculty in U.S. universities, and produce 28% of the nation's high-quality patents. Immigrants have founded more than 50% of the billion-dollar startup companies in the United States." So that's a nice chunk to take away in terms of justification for how significant a role immigrants play in our economic engine, in terms of our growth as a country, science and technology. So very, very, very heartened by seeing that kind of an article. Now, another piece that is also speaks to one of the countries that is a big driver in terms of U.S. interest in the United States for science and technology is an Indian American coming from Dr. Sudeep Parikh. He's CEO of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He talks about his immigrant experience, that he is the product of special expert visas and family migration into the United States. He talks about his family's background that allowed his family to come to India, his parents in particular to come from India to the United States, and that their parents' belief, his parents' belief in the vision of the U.S. as a shining city on a hill, and that language certainly resonates with a lot of immigrants that have come to the U.S. and in addition to the Statue of Liberty and all the various pieces of the American experience that we immigrants identify with. So he talks through the importance of immigrants in the scientific community and how, as an Indian American, he certainly is all over keeping this front and center to be a beacon, he calls it, for science and tech talent in the world, that people are drawn from overseas to the United States. And cannot be more supportive of that ideal. It's at the heart of who we are as a country, in terms of allowing those that have talents that wish to be here to use them to improve their own lot, but also the lot of the country. I think contributing to our economy, all our values that most Americans would embrace wholeheartedly because of the value that they bring to the country and making us all better for it, in better people, better technology, better tools that we have at our fingertips that help us improve our lives and the lives of our families and our communities. So these are the kinds of things, particularly from immigrant families, and we embrace wholeheartedly. And there are in terms of the impact of this. I certainly think you hear and see signs from the current administration that is much more open to easing those pathways and to clearing the obstacles that have been placed in their way over the past 4 years, certainly to improve their chances. We've seen this with refugee caps being restored, with interest in H-1B caps being raised, and those types of things that the Biden administration is doing. And on the international ed side, we're also seeing some movement that way. And that will dovetail nicely with our next topic, is why does the Education USA Forum matter? That's our second question of the week. And as we talk about this, those who know me well, and many of my Education USA colleagues over the past 28 years that I've been involved in international education can attest. The Education USA network of advisors, REACs, are at the heart and soul of what I believe are essential components of an international education strategy on any college campus that is serious about bringing students in from overseas and internationalizing their campuses. So Education USA, very near and dear to my heart, and the Education USA Forum, I had the pleasure of being involved in the production of the first one back in 2010 when we held it in a hotel in Washington, D.C. before having to expand to larger facilities. It's really seeing it develop over the last 11 years now into something that is one of the most important international ed conferences for U.S. educators, international educators, that you can attend. In terms of the global exposure you have, yes, NAFSA is bigger. NAFSA has 10,000 people from all over the world, but so does EdUSA Forum in a much more concentrated manner, and I think a much more focused manner, and a much more, I think, intentional and user-friendly format for interactions that you don't necessarily get at a much larger event. But the EdUSA Forum this year, obviously it's been virtual the last 2 years, and this year was, there may have been hopes to have it in person, but the cooler heads prevailed, and the decision was made to have it virtual. I've not worked for Education USA since 2014 when I left to start SMIE Consulting. And that's, but they've always been a part of who I am as an international educator. And the people that attend this event, particularly those that are in the advisor and REAC roles for Education USA, are some of the most amazing professionals I've seen. Some of the circumstances they've had to work in are just boggle the mind sometimes when you think about it. And the hardest working and perhaps most underpaid, particularly in the advising circles, underpaid staff that deserve so much more than their current employers, in whatever format they are able to provide. But the work that they do is essential in terms of connecting students with U.S. institutions for higher ed opportunities. They help throughout the enrollment process. And I know we talked in the past about Education USA. In 2013, 2014, we launched Your 5 Steps to U.S. Study, and how important that was in helping to simplify the U.S. higher education admissions process, which we all know is the most complex in the world. To be able to market that effectively, certainly Education USA in the last 7-8 years has done that to great effect, and it's still the central component of their website and their messaging for prospective students from around the world. And the forum itself has always been a place where the news updates from the field are anxiously awaited by attendees on the higher ed side. And for many years now, the Education USA Global Guide, which we also launched back in, I think, 2011, is seen as next to Open Doors, probably the most relevant and probably most actionable piece of research document that you can have as an international admissions professional in our field, that can give you the on-the-ground intelligence from the regions and the major sending countries, tips and tricks for social media and how to leverage those digital tools to reach student audiences in key markets. It's just a fabulous tool, and it's out again for 2021, as was released this week. But we'll talk. I'm going to be dropping links to all the major stories related to the EdUSA Forum and some of the products that they released, the global guide as well, dropping the links in the comments section for those who aren't attending who would like to get it. But one of the things I feel is this Education USA Forum is so important is it marks the first one since the inauguration of the Biden administration, and gives attendees the opportunity to really start talking about moving forward in a positive direction and having support from the administration to adopt policies, frankly, that international educators in the U.S. have talked about for decades, about having a national policy for international education. And it's something that, frankly, hasn't ever existed. The last time this was even thought about or acted on in any even nominal way was back in 2000, in April of 2000, in the last year of the Clinton administration, when there was a push to have all federal government agencies work through the vice president to craft an international education policy. Never happened. It was just launched during an election year when there was too much other noise going on at the time, issues in the administration, and for that to even ever get the traction it needed to effect some real change. If the election in 2000 had gone differently, and Al Gore, who was charged with this initiative by President Clinton, if he had been elected, might have been a different story, as it would have been part of his legacy in terms of programs that would carry over from the Clinton administration to his. That didn't happen. The election didn't go that way. Then 9/11 happened, and certainly international ed was in a period of recovery for a good 3 or 4 years before it rebounded to its current levels, pre-COVID, or pre-Trump even. And this is something that this particular event, the EdUSA Forum, was chosen, opening day on Monday this week, was chosen as the time to release a joint statement. And this joint statement is something that I think is pretty special. It's a joint statement that reflects the priorities given by Secretary Blinken, the current Secretary of State, who did it as a joint statement with Secretary Mendoza of Education, and with the support of Commerce and Homeland Security, though they weren't part of any video messages or did anything specific to say about this. As part of the joint statement, they're certainly signing on to it, obviously, as the main areas of government that have direct influence over international education matters with regard to visa policy and all of that, immigration benefits, that type of thing. But the Secretary Blinken's comments in his video statement, and we'll post a link to that as well, make reference to international education being considered by the Biden administration a foreign policy imperative. And that's language that we've not heard before. Certainly in the recent, probably the past 10, 15 years, that has never been part of the language that the State Department certainly has used. And this foreign policy imperative gives it a weight that we haven't seen in quite a long time. Now, this is, in this tasking, this joint statement, and the joint statement is actually it's called A Renewed U.S. Commitment to International Education, Re-engaging the World to Make the U.S. Stronger at Home. And it goes into all the various benefits and policy and types of things, what we're just talking about, the immigrant experience and the value of overseas students and scholars coming to the United States and enriching our campuses, enriching our communities that they live in, all of that. So obviously it's short on specifics, but this joint statement covers roughly 10 areas that are of focus, or shall be of focus, as this policy is fleshed out. That there's acknowledgement for the first time from a U.S. government perspective, I think from State Department perspective, that we're in a competitive world. And this is the perspective I talk about all the time with my 6 Ps of strategic international enrollment management, having that global perspective. And State Department, not surprisingly, has that global perspective, but this is the first time I've heard the language used that says, hey, we're in a competitive race for talent in the world, and we're being beaten in certain areas by countries who have much more wide open immigration systems, much more streamlined pathways from study to work to residency, and those are things that we can do a much better job of articulating with an international education policy. So the first step here is, or the first bullet that their focus will be on, is to participate in a coordinated national approach to international education, including study in the U.S. by international students, researchers, and scholars, study abroad for Americans, international research collaboration, and the internationalization of U.S. campuses and classrooms, which is, wow, that's international education right there, as to have a coordinated national approach to this. How this gets done, that's the devil's in the details, and we'll talk more about that in future episodes. Second, emphasize the U.S. government's commitment to support key facets of international education in partnerships with U.S. higher education institutions, schools, state and local governments, non-governmental entities, business community, and other stakeholders. Third, incorporate a strong focus on international education as part of the nation's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic in order to build back better at home. Build back better is a very important catchphrase in the Biden campaign and now in the administration, to maintain U.S. global leadership and promote equitable access to the benefits of international ed. Fourth, welcome international students, researchers, and scholars and educators to the U.S. in a safe and secure manner and encourage a diversity of participants, disciplines, and types of authorized schools and higher education institutions where they can choose to study, teach, and contribute to research. Other than the welcoming part and safe and secure part, that's not really anything new. That's kind of a fluff line as far as I'm concerned. Fifth, encourage U.S. students, researchers, and scholars and educators who reflect the diversity of the U.S. to pursue overseas study, obviously internships, research, and other international experiences. Great to see that. Sixth, recognize the significant benefits that international students, scholars, researchers, and exchange alumni contribute to research, innovation, and economic development and job opportunities in the U.S. Promote expanded access, number 7, to international education, including through the use of technology where in-person experiences are not feasible, to connect U.S. students, researchers, scholars, and educators with their peers abroad. Eighth, implement policies, procedures, and protocols so as to facilitate international education and authorize practical experiences, and that's talking about OPT, while promoting program integrity and protecting national security. Clearly communicate policy guidance and implement fair, efficient, transparent support processes while maintaining national security, upholding the law. 9, leverage existing international ed programs and resources to create new opportunities to broaden access. And 10th, foster increased cooperation among the federal government, private sector, and education institutions so as to maintain the integrity of federally funded and protected intellectual property and research endeavors from undue foreign influence and unlawful acquisition. So that addresses some of the key elements that Trump administration went overboard with their China initiative that we see kind of dying out here in the U.S. But covering a lot of ground, obviously. Key elements in there are focused on inbound students and scholars and researchers and such, but we don't have a lot of details yet as to what that's going to mean. Obviously, there are all the stakeholders outside of government are certainly excited about this and see it as a positive first step. And there's some great articles from Inside Higher Ed, from Forbes, from Chronicle, from Pi News, from a number of different outlets, Science magazine, talking about some of the implications of this. So we'll talk about what this is going to mean, and NAFSA certainly is probably going to be a key participant in this charge to get these whatever policy procedure changes implemented from at least rallying support for those. So we're going to see, I think, some really important next steps that'll be coming down the pike. And I really see this as a first step. But that's why the Education USA Forum matters, because it is the place where these kinds of announcements happen and can be seen as the kickoff for this new campaign for an international education strategy for our country. So great first step, miles to go before we sleep, but as those who know me well, I grew up in Missouri, so you still got to show me the details. Show me how this will work and what the policy initiatives will be, what's doable through administrative and regulatory changes, and what will require larger acts of Congress. Some of the things we've talked about here on the Roundup, like making F1 a dual intent status that would eliminate the 214B requirement for F1 students applying for visas, and other things like that, expanding access to H-1B after graduation, making that program more seamless, giving doctoral students, doctoral graduates automatic green cards. All of those are steps that can be taken and have been proposed, frankly, and should be acknowledged in initial proposals that we talked about last week that the Biden administration launched in January. Did include the PhDs for STEM international graduates, giving green cards to them, as well as proposing that dual intent for F1s. So that's their immigration bill that is going to get cannibalized if it ever gets to a floor vote. But certainly there are pieces that we would like as international educators that at least they're taking a good look at addressing. So good signs coming out of the forum this week. Obviously great to reconnect with all the colleagues that I've had great experiences with, and I know many of my international ed friends on the U.S. side who have interacted with EdUSA. Certainly they share my thoughts in that regard. So let's move on to that final question of the day. How should colleges deal with reopening? We've seen the full range of institutional stories over the last couple of months as going back to when Rutgers first said they're going to require vaccines to only FDA vaccines, and now that policy's changed and morphed a bit, to colleges that have been trying to encourage their current students to get vaccinated before they return, and having drives on campus, and even giving incentives out there. And we dropped a story in this week's edition of our newsletter that for about Central Michigan University that's doing full tuition scholarships, doing hundreds of gift cards that they're giving away to students who show that they've been vaccinated. So there are a lot of different ways that's going. There's an interesting webinar coming up on, let's see, this one is going to be August 5th, and that's with IIE and IDP Connect. It's called Reopening International Education, Student and Institutional Perspectives, and I think that's always good perspective to have when you look at how universities are perceiving the issues and how international students are perceiving those that aren't here yet, how they're perceiving those issues from the different perspectives. So I think that's going to be some useful information to kind of see how things are shaking out. Where the disconnects may or may not be between incoming students and institutions. We've seen a story just out today that the Cal State system is going to be requiring vaccines for all their student, staff, and faculty for the upcoming academic year. And the Chronicle's running list of campuses that are requiring vaccinations has now hit 607, broke the 600 barrier. That's the first time that's happened. It had been in the 500s for probably going on 2 months. But now over 600 campuses, and that's still not nearly what it probably will be in the end, or could be in the end, but probably lower than what I think many colleges, state institutions in particular, if they're in red states, they may be prohibited from doing that, from requiring vaccines either by their legislatures or governors have made proclamations that way. We've seen a federal court uphold Indiana University's requirement that in order to be on campus, you need to have a vaccine, whether faculty, staff, or employee. That was challenged in court, and the judge, citing legitimate public health concerns, made his decision in favor of Indiana U. So will other colleges feel emboldened by that? There are a couple of agencies in Illinois, another Midwestern state, that oversee higher education, Illinois Board of Higher Ed and the Illinois Community College Board, that are recommending colleges and universities require the vaccine ahead of the fall term, and their governor there's no legislation pending that would certainly require it, but they would probably feel emboldened to do so. Some institutions, University of Illinois, Northwestern, and DePaul, have already said they're going to be mandating vaccines. So a wide range of where institutions are coming down on this issue, and certainly miles to go before we sleep on this one. But a lot of positives this week, and we're really excited about what with this new international ed proposal or strategy that's coming out from the federal government. If it does take flight, certainly there's going to be a lot of folks in international ed circles here in the U.S. that are going to be excited about that opportunity and what it's going to mean for them as they go out to recruit students to come, and how positive a change that will be over what we've experienced the last 4 years. So that's all we have for the Roundup this week. Appreciate you taking the time to join us either live or on repeat. And those that are downloading the podcast, thanks for making us a part of your listening enjoyment this past week and all weeks. So until next time, again, we'll be taking the week off next Wednesday in August, first week of August, but we'll be back the second week of August with our 150th episode of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. So until next time, have a great day.